Hey guys, welcome back to the chat with Les Crowder and myself. I'm your host, Nathalie B, and I'm a Texas A&M master beekeeper, and I work with Les Crowder, who's joining us. Hopefully we can hear him. If you can test Les for your voice.
Can you hear me? You can't hear me?
No, we can't hear you. So let's try. I'm not sure what's going on. Feel free to keep trying and jump in as you can. Les is he's got over 50 years experience in beekeeping. He used to be New Mexico state beekeeping inspector, and he also has worked for commercial beekeeper, kept thousands of hives in Langstroth, and then switched over to Tabar hive, his favorite type of hives. And also he went from conventional beekeeping to treatment-free natural beekeeping. So he's got experience with all that stuff and many kinds of hives. We have a teaching apiary where we have layens, long-langs, tabars of all kinds. I forget what else. Comfort, just kind of all kinds of hives. So we've got all that experience. So let me get everybody in and we'll get started with a theme, and Les will jump in when he can. Let's try that. Yeah, I still can't hear you, Les.
That's really strange.
So while Les is kind of trying to figure out, let me see. No, you're not muted. His sound, maybe you can dial in from your phone, Les. I don't know. Maybe that's going to help out. Try that. The theme for tonight is going to be basically finding the joy of beekeeping and just kind of learning how to keep the joy and the awe in the beekeeping and just either finding it or keeping it and resurrecting it. So welcome everybody. I see Sherry and Dwayne and Naveen and Richard, and so it's really good to have you guys. We'll get Les going in a minute, and in the meantime, let me see what I've got here. I've got Iowa Layens Beekeeping. George, hey, you say you hear Les? I cannot hear him. Let me see. Have you guys? We'll get Les going in a minute. Les, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I've got Iowa Layens Beekeeping.
Niven, can you hear me?
So let me
yes, I can hear you.
Do this. Okay, Les, can you hear me?
You can hear me.
Hey,
Yes.
I think maybe the technical difficulties are over and we're good to go. Les, welcome for your time again tonight.
Well, good. It occurred to me this evening, partly because I was thinking, what are we going to do? And I wasn't sure. And I thought, I've touched on everything I can think of several times already. But then I realized that this is something that happens a lot with beekeeping. People start off, they get introduced to beekeeping, and at first they're like, why would I ever want to do that? And then they suddenly take it seriously and think, wow, this could be really interesting. And when they get started, it's totally amazing to them. Like, wow, I can play with these insects, and then I don't even get stung all that much, and it's nothing to be afraid of, and it's so amazing. And there's lots of joy. And people get what we call bee fever. Pretty soon their bumper sticker says, I'll buzz you right back, and their pickup has got bees on board in the window, and everything's bee, 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 and all the cliches. And people get kind of just over enthused with beekeeping, which is wonderful. It's kind of like falling in love, and you're happy to just introduce bees to everybody, talk about bees. And then the years go by and it slowly starts to fade. Another thing that happens is that you come into beekeeping, usually kind of terrified of the bees, like, oh my gosh, this is a box full of thousands of stinging, flying insects. What am I doing? So you put on all the gloves, you completely suit up, you're pretty much protected against the bees. You're a little bit fearful and trepidatious, and it turns out not to be that big of a deal. And so you slowly drop your guard here and there, and you get less and less careful. And I've seen that go dangerous. I've seen that go from very well protected to less and less protected, to get cavalier and kind of like, oh, well, I didn't bother with my smoker field. It's all wet. I'm not going to bother with my smoker. I'm not going to bother. Can't find my veil right now, but they're usually very docile. And then you get stung really hard. Like I had one friend that he literally almost died. We found his wife found him on the ground, just covered in bee stings all over his face. And that became, then he almost quit keeping bees, because he went from one extreme of always wearing a suit, always being fully dressed. He went less and less, and then he broke a lot of the rules, and he got stung really hard, and it scared the heck out of him. And it almost made him quit keeping bees after quite a few years of keeping bees. And that reminded me of another issue one time. So there was a bee scientist who wrote books about beekeeping, the art and adventure, beekeeping in the Midwest. His name was Dr. Albert J. Cox. He retired in the state of New Mexico, and he had several books. And like one of his books, the cover showed a Langstroth hive and his head sticking out of the Langstroth hive, which back in those days, there wasn't Photoshop so much. So that was a tricky thing. And he was Mr. Bee. He literally dedicated his life to researching beekeeping. And I liked a lot of his research because he was very practical and somewhat interested in what the bees preferred, as opposed to what most of the research back in those days was all about how to increase honey production. And it wasn't about bee biology. It was more about upping honey production any way you could and feeding bees whatever you could to strip all their honey and give them feed that they would more or less live on. And so I appreciated his perspective. And I invited him to New Mexico to speak quite a bit. And he actually wound up coming to New Mexico to retire from the University of Illinois. And we got to be friendly and everything. And, he didn't live too far away. So we had him to all of our New Mexico meetings. And then he suddenly kind of dropped out. I called him and he didn't answer. I wrote to back in those days, a handwritten letter. He didn't answer. I thought, well, that's funny. So time went on and I did other things. And then one day a car showed up out in the driveway. It was him and his wife. By this point, he was in his mid-70s. And he hadn't announced that he was coming or anything. But I was home, and so I said, Jake, how you doing? And he said, well, I'm wondering if you could sell me a couple of nukes of bees. I thought, well, that's kind of out of the blue. And I wasn't selling nukes to the general public, but I thought, I'll get him a couple of nukes. And he paid very nicely for them, but that wasn't the point, really. The point was just try to find him some bees and not put my bees too far back. So he brought 2 empty boxes in the top and the bottom and straps. So we went down to the bee yard, and he said, I don't really want to talk about bees. I said, okay, that's kind of weird to me. I mean, I didn't know what else to talk to him about. We were going to go get bees, but let's talk about the weather or politics or something else. I don't know what else is there to talk about. And then he turned to me and he kind of got a little bit angry, and he said, I've overdid it with bees. I dedicated my whole life to bees. All my vacation time was speaking at conferences and I don't even have a relationship with my own kids. My kids have kids, and I don't even hardly know my grandkids' names. They're half afraid of me. And I was like, whoa, okay. I did not prepare for, I wasn't prepared to do psychoanalysis or whatever, but I was really, he was very resentful. And here he was, the bee scientist, and a really good bee scientist in many respects. But he was very adamant that he'd overdone beekeeping. And that's when I realized because I know other people like Dr. Kephis. His whole life's been about beekeeping, and he's still full of the awe and inspiration of honeybees. Mm-hmm. And he still has lots of fun. And so what do we do to help us keep that awe and that joy and not get so serious? Well, the first thing is don't take ourselves so seriously, and don't take beekeeping quite so seriously. We're all a little bit mistaken. We're all a little bit correct. We're all a little bit having fun and I know I can get pretty serious about treatments, but that's because I've been kind of damaged by treatments, and I've also always taken up the farm workers side of things. And the farm workers are often damaged by pesticides. Farm workers wind up getting high levels of autism in their kids because of the farm workers' exposure to pesticides, things like that. Well, that's taking it seriously again. So how do we keep the joy? And that is going back to when you first started keeping bees and that first love, or imagining seeing bees from the eyes of a child. When you show a child a beekeeping, what happens is we develop an operating system. And at first, we don't have much of an operating system about bees, except to run or to be like, huh, or to swat or something because we're afraid of them. And then little by little, we develop a beekeeper's operating system that often has something to do with the mentor that started us or the classes that started us. But if we look into bees and the awe of beekeeping, it still is pretty amazing. It's, like, for instance, little facts like 1,600 florets of clover. So if you look at a clover head, it's a bunch of tiny little flowers stuck on one head. Each one of those is called a floret. And it takes 1,600 florets of clover to make a drop of honey. Then you realize, wow, that's like sip, 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 1,600 sips to make one drop of honey. That's truly amazing. It's almost miraculous then that you can get a big old quart jar filled up with honey. Think of how many millions of sips that is. And that's flowers waving at bees, because that's why flowers are colorful, right? They're basically saying, bees, come and get it. We're over here. Dump out a scent so that the bees can trace the scent, put out the color, and then give them a sweet bit of nectar just so they can get pollinated. But that's worth so much to the flower, because the flower, the wind pollinated plants have to just dump copious quantities of pollen in the air, which is expensive for a plant to make. DNA is high protein, it's very expensive. And when a wind pollinated plant dumps tons of pollen out there, it just hopes that a few grains land on the female parts of a flower of the same species somewhere downwind. It's a huge waste. Most of the pollen winds up in the rivers, on the dirt, on the leaves, anywhere but where it needs to go. So a plant, can make a flower that attracts a bee, and it makes that pollen extra nutritious for the bee, because it wants the bee to eat some of that pollen. Just like eventually later the apple tree wants us to come and eat the apple. That's why it makes it red and fragrant and beautiful, because it's hoping we're going to see it and smell it and take a bite and go, oh, yum, and carry those seeds far and wide. So that's nature. nature is so amazing if we look into it with children's eyes. But we get to where we think we know about this and we know about that, and we know all about beekeeping because we've been doing it all our lives. And then we lose track of the beauty and the awe-inspiring wonder of beekeeping. And we need to keep that beauty and that wonder, because it still is amazing. Bees are truly, like, even just their flight defies most of physics. Bumblebee's flight is barely viable according to physics, and yet the bumblebees do a very good job of it. So there's obviously things about physics that we don't know. You know, they've recently been finding that bumblebees play, and the bumblebees can do a certain amount of math. And bumblebees, being somewhat more primitive than honeybees, in my opinion, I've seen honeybees land on a field of flowers and just roll in the pollen and then gather it up. And I'm just imagining them like, oh, this is so beautiful. This is so delicious. You know, we think that we're conscious. Well, we are. But that doesn't mean bees, because they're different sizes of brain and so forth, aren't just as conscious in their own way. They're better at being bees than we are. So how do you keep that joy and that happiness and not take yourself so seriously as a beekeeper? And remember to be protected. And part of the awe is not just the joy, but it's also the fearful respect. That we should respect the fact that we are opening a box full of thousands of flying, stinging insects. Just today, I opened 2 hives for somebody because they were worried that the hives were dwindling away to nothing. Well, they have dwindled, but they dwindled down to the winter cluster, and that's fine. There was still plenty of bees, there was brood, there was plenty of honey. And I told her, that's all you need to do. And she said, oh, there's bees all over your hand. I said, yeah, these are very calm bees.
Is that Ashley?
Hmm?
Is that Ashley that you went to visit?
Yeah.
But she's on YouTube watching us right now, so that's really cool.
Good.
Yeah, she's a first-year beekeeper, and she was actually saying that this is a great topic because she was just thinking about this recently and was really excited to start beekeeping, but at times she feels like she bit off a little bit more than she can chew. And for her is the fear of failing, and it's her first year, right? So basically that fear of failing the bees and losing them is kind of what's driving a lot of people's stress about beekeeping. Yeah, she's saying yes. And actually Naveen on Zoom is saying, she's kind of quoting you back, we should not take beekeeping so seriously, but she wants to know what that means, because does it mean we should be okay with making mistakes, such as killing more bees than we want to, but perhaps for the sake of learning, right? What do you mean exactly by that? And my take on it is that maybe not be so scared or have so much fear of what can happen. Excuse me. Both Les and I have some coughing going on. Les just had the flu, actually. So you guys are lucky to have him tonight.
Yeah, I'm feeling quite a bit better, but it hit the family pretty hard. But yeah, let's both cough at once there. So, I mean, you know, like we want the industry and the clubs try to make you take it very seriously, and fear. They teach you, oh, if you don't treat your bees for mites, you're gonna lose your bees. And that's just plain not true. But when you don't, especially for your first year, there's so much that you worry about and you don't know. And so you're worried, oh, if I don't do this right, they're going to die. They might die, but that's not your fault. That lots of things happen to bees. Mm-hmm. Bees are pretty ephemeral. I liken them to a 2-stroke engine. When you start let's say a chainsaw, Vroom, 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 vroom. It can go out pretty easily, and then it can roar back to life. And when it's roaring to life, it's like cutting right through a tree, and it's powerful. But when it dies, it just has no power left, and it just very easily dies on you. Bees are kind of like that. They're kind of like, and so hopefully enough of them. That's why you want to start with 2 or 3 or 4, so that if one goes, you still have the other to compare it to. But actually, her bees are looking great. There's plenty of bees, plenty of honey. There's some brood, which means there's a queen. Normally this time of the year, there's very little brood, or maybe no brood. And so that doesn't mean that there isn't you don't see brood, that doesn't mean there isn't a queen. It just means she's not laying right now. But and that's pretty normal. But I know that, they did diminish from where they were before. So in the summer, they got to be full and almost filled the box. And now they've gone down to relatively few frames of bees. But there's a good pack of bees in those few frames. And they're keeping plenty warm in the winter. And they're going to be fine. And, we can always check in February or something like that, late January, even if you're really worried.
So I think that worry, that fear is what drives a lot of the stress that's going on with beekeeping. And maybe we don't work as much with our bees. We try to overthink and basically push our own agenda or project our own fear of cold, fear of famine, fear of all kinds of things. And so we try to inject ourselves to protect them, when the best tool that we can kind of get to help the bees is to arm ourselves with knowledge, so that we're not so stressed out, and so we can do our best and leveraging the biology of the honeybee. And so in the first year, Ashley, that's exactly what's kind of tough, right? For everybody that doesn't have a lot of bees, or that don't have a lot of years of experience. That's kind of what's coming into play. So learning the biology of the honeybee on your spare time is going to help you relax and kind of forego that fear. It's going to allow you to start understanding what's going on in the beehive, and just kind of read it so that you can kind of do what you have to do if there's a problem, without trying to kind of push recipes or things right away. The other thing that it does is that it teaches you that not all colonies are meant to be staying alive. Even in nature, the failure rate is about 75% for swarms in their first year. And so understanding that, and the fact that not all colonies are meant to survive, allows us to forgive ourselves and just kind of do our best, and learn that if it doesn't work out, it's not necessarily our fault. And then you can always catch more bees, or use that learning experience for the next time around, so that you can progress and get better at it. So if you stick with it and you learn the biology of the honeybee, forgive yourself and relax, you're going to rekindle that joy, that awe of beekeeping, right, Les?
Right. And bees, by their nature, they want to survive, of course, and they're doing their best. And like in Ashley's case, she's got 2 different sources of bees, some bee weaver and some Italians. They both look pretty good. The Italians are classic bright yellow Italians, but they're doing fine. And the bee weaver bees, a little bit more jumpy, mixed color, but they're doing really well. And so each hive is going to have a slightly different operating system of its own to get through the year. But I bet come February, especially in San Antonio area, you're going to start to see some flowers bloom, and the bees are going to increase. And it won't be long before they're expanding and expanding. And we'll want to even get them converted, because she's ready to do some conversions into a top our hive. And we'll be off and running with next spring. I don't know that neighborhood of San Antonio that well. It's not far from my house, but I haven't kept bees here. because of my HOA, and I just dare not. I'm
Bee
sure that
friendly, not bee
yeah,
friendly.
it's not a place for bees. But yeah, I keep bees. I help people with bees not far from here, and San Antonio can have a great spring. So just take it easy. And the other thing is, a lot of the clubs kind of instill that in you, like they shame you if you don't treat.
Mhm.
They shame you if you lose your bees. Well, you're just a beehiver. You don't know what you're doing. None of us know exactly what we're doing, but I have a lot of experience, and I know that I can kind of tell in the fall if a beehive is likely to make it or not. And often I wind up combining them if before they die out on their own. But I just have a lot of experience. I've been doing this since I was a teenager, and I'm 65 years old now. So I've been doing it, and I do it a lot. I spend a lot of time with bees. That's my favorite place to spend time, is in a beehive.
Well, slowing down also helps, just kind of forget about the overwhelming feeling, and just even if you don't know a lot, just kind of sit there and observe and watch, and you're going to be in awe. You're going to have that joy that Les was talking about, and you're going to learn a lot just by watching in the first place without trying to interfere. Um, I wanted to say hi to Bruce Rodriguez from Swarmstead Bees and Gardening. It's good to have you on. Thank you for joining us. I want to say hi to, well, actually, I already told her. And James is here with us. And then I have a few questions from Paula. She's asking, are you all feeding fondant to them currently? She's in Comanche, Texas. They've been in drought for most of this year, not much honey stores. It's going to be about 80 degrees tomorrow. We're in Texas, remember? So I'm considering feeding them fondant tomorrow. Les, what's your take on feeding them fondant for the winter?
It's dry. If they eat it, I guess that's okay. I try to, feed as little as possible sugar, and try to get them as much honey. But if they didn't make honey, sometimes you have to feed them some sugar, and you definitely want to feed them fairly dry sugar, like at least 2 to 1 if you're making syrup, and the fondant is okay. I've never really dealt with fondant very much. I don't even like to feed them much sugar at all. But when I do, I try to just feed them a little bit of 2 to 1. But they don't need the water right now. The water is just contributing to condensation inside the beehive, particularly if you're in a langstroth that's stacked vertically, which most of you are. Then that's just going to condense as the bees breathe. Their breath is going to rise above them, humid, and condense in the cold honey and drip right back down on them, and potentially make some moldy honey combs. They get over it, I suppose, but really, I find the bees around here shut themselves way down. So they get really small brood nests, and they don't need much honey. So if there's any weight at all in that hive, I'd wait a little bit. But if there's not much weight, if you're worried that they're literally going to starve to death, then tomorrow's going to be a good day to feed them some. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be warm, and then it's going to get cold again. So
Yeah, and just keep in mind that with a smaller population, they don't need as much food necessarily, as long as their hives have good thermal mass or good configuration, where it's not an issue with the condensation and all that chimney effect and too much vertical height. In Texas, we recommend kind of compressing them down if you are in a Langstroth. And anything that has thick walls is going to help out as well with that thermal mass. Sherry Lane saying, these meetings have given me peace of mind on a number of occasions when we've had something happen and we're able to ask you too about it. So that's another way to rekindle your joy with beekeeping, is to find your peace of mind by asking and talking to people that can help out in a way that's reassuring and not kind of overwhelming. Speaking of overwhelming, there's a lot of overwhelming information in beekeeping with a lot of contradicting opinions, which is the famous joke. You get asked a question to 10 beekeepers and you're going to get 15 answers, and they're all more or less valid for the most part. But you also have a lot of really bad information out there, so you want to be very careful where you get your information. There's also a lot of differences of opinion and a lot of arguing. So people that are in a treatment-free community, for example, are very used to getting shunned and just kind of like really told that if they don't treat their bees, they're going to die and they're monsters and they're abusing their animals. But really, you can't fall for that. You kind of step away and just kind of look around for information that seems like it makes sense for what you know about the bees or what works with your style, and avoid getting into the arguments with people. You can have intelligent conversations, and the best way to do that is to educate yourself. Keep yourself very educated about the biology, about everything that you read in reputable places and books, and just kind of arm yourself with that knowledge. It's going to help with your beekeeping, and it's going to help you realize that a lot of that overwhelming information out there is just junk, a lot of it. So just keep that in mind, right, Les?
Yeah, and even USDA was getting behind you got to treat, and now they've come up with their own Poline resistant bee. And they're talking about the future is not more chemicals, and so that to me shows you, if you stick for me, the basic truth was we don't need to give bees toxic chemicals in order to get them to survive. And I had to trust that. And there were times when I lost bees to foul brood, for instance, when I didn't use my antibiotics. But then I read for my survivors, and pretty soon I wasn't losing my bees. And people who were using terramycin were losing their bees because the foul brood was becoming resistant to the terramycin. And so that's the long-term vision. I often think there's a difference in long-term versus short-term. So a lot of people saying treat, that's like right now, get rid of those mites, kill those mites. And that's saying you have an enemy that you got to eradicate. First of all, you can't eradicate your enemies. Your enemies literally come from within yourself to a certain extent. And it's your hate of them that drives you, and it makes you miserable. So just let it go. And the mites, I'm not saying I love the mites, but I now don't fear them anymore. I'm totally fine with seeing a mite or two and saying, oh, there's a mite. What do you know?
Well, nobody loves mites, but to Kirk Webster's point, to Dr. Keefus's point, they are useful, and we should actually learn to appreciate them for their value, which is putting pressure on the bees to get stronger, right? So when we realize that they can serve a purpose in the health of the colony, in a way that you're working with bees that are learning. And by the way, there's a difference. I mean, I know the big argument is always like, well, evolution has taken thousands of years, millions of years for the Apis cerana to work along the mites, and it's impossible for our bees to do that in such a short period of time. Well, there's a difference between evolution and natural selection. Natural selection happens a whole lot faster than evolution, and the bees can develop their own systems, and they can adapt a lot faster to pressures like the mites. So we can make those tools for us to get stronger bees. The other aspect of things is that we need to understand, and so another way to kind of relax the pressure on yourselves, we know that a lot of people buy their bees. They are a financial investment. But if you talk to Bruce from Swarmstead Bees and Gardening and others that know this very well, you don't have to buy bees. You can catch them, you can trap them, you can collect them. And then your financial pressure disappears, and you realize that, it's not like it's less important to when you lose them, it's just that you don't feel stressed financially about that loss. So that kind of allows you to relax a little bit. And also learning that you can split your bees in the spring to make up for some of the losses also helps release that pressure of loss, that fear of loss, right? So that you can smell the roses and just kind of start to enjoy your beekeeping. And you know what? There's always going to be more bees. So remember that as well, right, Wes?
Right. And by making your own divide, that empowers you, and it also helps you give the bees their natural brood break, and that helps the bees. That's really what the bees are all about: survival and reproduction. And if they get survival down, then they want to reproduce, and that means either be divided or cast a swarm, which is basically can be almost the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you let your bees get kind of crowded and then watch for queen cells, when as soon as there are active queen cells, that means they're getting ready to swarm. Then say, okay, fine, swarm right here, and make a divide. It's basically like the swarm they were about to cast. You're just working with the bees in their natural system, and now they've got a brood break in both hives. They let them drop a bunch of their mites, and everybody, it's a kind of a win-win for the beekeeper and the bees.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of a not so great for the mice, but that's okay.
But like you said, leverage that swarming instinct, leverage that biology. Don't try to force it on the bees. Every time you try to force something, you end up kind of with some potential problems down the line. Dr. HVAC says, I don't treat. I feel the bees would exist without us. Why not let them be? And that's part of the thing, right? It's just kind of let them do what they do. They've been around for millions of years. And very often we're actually counterproductive. We are the ones, I mean, we're the biggest threats to their health by our mere intervention. So what we should strive to do, and it's also going to bring us that peace, is that we need to start learning to step back and watch them do what they do best, with maybe, helping a little bit on the side. So I want to remind everybody, by the way, that you have the option to ask questions. We're here for you to answer your questions as we weave through the theme for tonight, which is rekindling the joy and the awe of beekeeping. So just keep that in mind at the same time. And Bruce says, if I can do it, anyone can, talking about the swarm catching. His channel's got a lot of info about swarm catching. So if you want to kind of learn how to do that, there's a lot of good information there and a bunch of other things. So, and recently there's a lot of like chats with people that are very pragmatic about their beekeeping. So check it out as well. Excuse me. So trust the bees and kind of learn to dance with them, right, Les?
Right, and then plant flowers, go for walks, look in your neighborhood and see, oh, there's bees in that bush. Wonder what color the pollen is on her back legs. And that way, when you see that, excuse me, when you see that color pollen going in the hive, you'll be able to know, oh, that's that bush I saw, and then figure out what that bush is, and just learn to integrate yourself with nature, because the more you knit yourself with nature and your bees, the more you're going to enjoy it, and you're not going to lose that enthusiasm. When you see little kids, like my granddaughters, see a dandelion flower, she's 3 years old, and she goes, Papa, a dandelion. And she'll pick it, and she's like, it's yellow. Yep, it's yellow. She's so enthused about that dandelion flower. Well, I've seen a lot of dandelion flowers, but that doesn't mean that one isn't very beautiful. But I've gotten to where maybe I'm a bit jaded about dandelion flowers. And she helps me realize, wow, it's so amazing. Look how delicate this flower is. And dandelion flowers are good for bees. I remember one time being thrust. I had never taken care of a lawn before, and my father-in-law was going on vacation. He wanted me to look into his lawn, and he said, "Now this is the tool you use, and then you pour this poison in there every time a dandelion appears." I was like, "What?" That's the one thing good about your lawn is the dandelions. You want me to go around poisoning them? And I looked at all the neighborhoods. This was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The whole neighborhood was full of lawns. And I realized, oh my gosh, we're doing this to acres and acres. We're poisoning all the dandelions. It made no sense to me because I had already been a beekeeper at that point, and I thought, this is crazy. We should be growing flowers and making the place more and more beautiful. I mean, in many respects, a lot of the world's problems can be solved by growing beautiful flowers, not fancy flowers, beautiful wildflowers that take care of themselves and don't need a lot of water and a lot of attention. And that will solve a lot of bees' problems and a lot of our problems with nature, learning to work with nature instead of against nature, and reducing poison. And in that respect, we can feel proud as treatment-free beekeepers that we're leading the way towards a better form of existence with nature that can transfer to other parts of agriculture and other parts of life, you know.
Yeah, and the other thing is be in the moment. Remember that smell the roses, but also just kind of slow down to work the bees and just kind of, it helps you forget everything else that's going on in your life. You can watch nature, you can feel more connected to nature, you can take those walks. I was in one of our teaching apiaries, and just kind of the light of, the late year sunshine that's going down, and that golden light in the fields, well, you've got your smoker going and it's kind of quiet, and it's just the bees are buzzing and you can just watch them come home, and it's just beautiful. So finding that nature connection is also going to be a great way to kind of find that joy in beekeeping. And also you can use it as meditation, right? When you're in the beehive, just kind of get in the flow, in the zone. Les Naveen is saying she's got a question that is not about the joy of beekeeping, but practicalities. At my Tabar hives, I have entrance reducers, those discs with various openings. And when it became cold, I turned the discs to the slit opening that lets the worker bees pass, but not queens or drones. Oops. I did that to keep mice from moving in during the cold. Now I wonder, with winter worker bees who are fatter, will they fit through them? And by the way, you want to be careful when you do that. I don't turn it to the slit because it's hard on the bees, but mostly if you have the drones still in the hives, they can die in the hive, and potentially if you've got too many deaths, they can clog up that entrance. So just be mindful of that. What I like to do is decrease that circle to just a little bit of a intersection. So you're going to have like a little bit of an entrance in the center of my fingers, where the entrance hole is like this, and the hole to the disc entrance reducer is going to be closing it for just most of it, except for like a finger worth. And then you can still get the fatter bees, the drones, and enough traffic, maybe one or two bees, so that if they need to clean up, they can do that. It's going to help with robbing also. They can better guard the hive, so that's going to decrease the stress on the colonies. But I wouldn't use the slits, honestly. Les, what do you think of those slits on the disc entrance reducers?
Yeah, I'm not big on those entrance reducers in general. And I realize a lot of people really like them, and they're kind of cool, I guess, in a way. I'm kind of Stone Age, so I sticks and rocks. So I like to stick a stick or a rock that fits nice and tight, but still leaves a decent space so a drone can get out fairly easily, but not, a big wide open space. Like today, in front of Ashley's hive, we found a dead yellow jacket or hornet or whatever you want to call it. And that reminded me that, the bees were protecting their entrance very well. There was 10 or 12 bees all around the entrance. And so that's probably not a problem. And it was a small entrance anyway. She had it down to the little tiny entrance on the Langstroth stick thing you put in there that's got several different settings. So she had it on the smallest setting, which is wise for this time of the year. And so that's another reason to make sure that it is pretty small, because you don't want those, once those yellow jackets get started, they can kill your beehive.
And actually, let me get to that. I have a question on that. But before I get there, Sherry Lane saying days like today, in like we were in Texas, it was like 75, 76, beautiful, are perfect for going around and collecting fall flower seeds from the flowers you noticed that your bees and butterflies love, so that you can plant them for next year. And that's a great point, because Les and I were talking about, hey, are we collecting some sumac seeds? And then I was in the field and I was looking at all the goldenrod, and I was like, the flowers were spent and it was going to seed. And I was like, I'm going to need to cut all this and just spread it all over the place. Same for the fake willow, all those trees and bushes that are really good for the pollinators. You can make a trip of that, right? So that's a great point as well.
We can definitely plant more sumac.
Yep.
The sumac comes in real handy in the fall if it rains, and it makes a lot of flowers, and it can make a fair amount of honey. It's a really excellent plant for the hill country.
So you can make a trip out and just kind of scavenge for seeds and make yourself a little, bag of seeds for that you then scatter all over the neighborhoods and kind of share with your neighbors. Make seed bombs, do things for the fall where you can't get really outside into the bees. There's all kinds of things you can still do in the winter. That question I wanted to ask was from Darren, one of our apprentices. He was like Naveen and Dwayne. He's got a yellow jacket nest in his 6 feet away from his hive in his yard. And he says that it's a large one. It's in a rotten stump in the ground. And what's the best way to get rid of that nest? Because they've been robbing his hives and may have killed off 2 of his colonies. He's been finding lots of yellow jackets in his hives lately. So by the way, that's one of the things that a lot of the queens from wasps and potter wasps and mud daubers, all kinds of yellow jackets, everybody is kind of, they're not truly eusocial, and they kind of like, some of them have a generation where only the queens survive the winter and get to start a new colony in the spring. So could we tell him if he doesn't have the time to wait, he could put rubber screens and really minimize those entrances? And also, if the weather turns cold, all those are going to pretty much die. They're just kind of in the last hooray for food, right, Les?
Yeah, so they are semi-social. That means that the nest should break up on its own anytime now. Because the queens, so what's going to happen is this spring, queens hibernate all winter, what little winter we have, and the queen yellow jackets I'm talking about, and they look a lot like the regular yellow jacket, but they're considerably bigger and fatter and more robust. And they will actually go out and forage all by themselves. And there may be 100 or 200 of them come out of that nest that are going to all try to start their own nests next spring. So what I would do is I'd go to the feed store and get some of these traps that they sell that are specifically for yellow jackets. They're yellow plastic bags, or they have glass ones. And they have a little opening, and you hang them up in a tree, and you pour this, they sell you this, it comes with this little jar of yucky stuff that smells bad. But, those wasps like rotting meat, so they're attracted to it. So they go down in it and fall down in it and then drown. Then their bodies begin to decay, and that adds to the allure for the next ones to come in. And they keep loading the trap with more and more decaying matter, which is actually attractive. So I would set the 6 or 8 of those traps out right away. I'd also be really tempted to put on my bee veil, light my smoker, and do what I could to that nest in the stump in a non-toxic way. Like pour water on it, soapy water,
Mhm.
something like that, just to make sure it's done in, and then set out some traps so that the queens, if you set them out now, pretty soon the queens are going to come out of hibernation, start looking for flowers, and they'll fly into those traps. And then they never even start a nest. And I've had that bad hornet or yellow jacket problems in northern New Mexico, where I wound up catching hundreds and hundreds of queens in those traps. And then pretty soon we didn't have very many
Pressure was
yellow
down.
jackets anymore. And I mean, I don't wish ill will on the yellow jackets, but they got to leave my bees alone.
Right. Well, and having them close by is the issue. Now, it's important to realize that it might not be the wasps that did your colony in. If they had low population and couldn't defend from other bees even and got robbed, all kinds of critters come in after the fact, like ants and wasps and all kinds of things, right? So it's not always caused by the yellow jackets, but sometimes they come in as scavengers and opportunistic scavengers. But yeah, if that's an issue, that's where they're going to take your colony down. You want to make sure you're reducing all your entrances and keep a large populations. Combine if you have to the smaller colonies, and just kind of like Les was saying, try to minimize the pressure from the pests as well.
And you can put the screen around there, like the rubber screen, with one small entrance on the side. You gotta help your bees keep them out. Excuse me.
Right. I'm very familiar with the feeling when you can't finish a sentence. So, by the way, Bruce is saying, "Oh, I want to send you guys some clustered mountain mint roots. Maybe we should start a seed exchange or root exchange program where we kind of look into this." And then Richard was saying, when you say sumac, is that the same as staghorn sumac? Les, I think we're talking about red sumac. Is it staghorn sumac?
No, well, there's several different kinds of sumacs.
There's several, yes.
They're,
There's
they're
golden
right
and
here.
red.
Like,
Yeah.
I remember when I was at a friend beekeeper's house who was teaching a class, she had 3 different species of sumac right in her bee yard.
Oh, wow.
There's a fairly tall one with very pointy leaves. That's pretty common, kind of ladder-like leaves that turn bright orange in the fall. And there's a smaller one that's got pretty rounded leaves, but they're still opposites, like a ladder formation. So there's quite a few different types of sumac, and they tend to be trees, or because I'm familiar with staghorn milkweed also, but the sumac tends to be large bushes or smallish trees. It's fairly soft wooded, so that they break up pretty easily. They kind of come and go a little bit. They're not long lived. And that's why you want to keep replanting them and getting them to replant themselves as much as possible.
So James on YouTube say he almost missed it tonight. Thanks goodness for YouTube. And I want to remind you all, by the way, if you want to get a notification that we're going live as a reminder so that you don't have to keep thinking about it, your phone can send you a notification if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell. That will automatically send you a reminder when we come on live, and you can join us on YouTube and ask your questions there, or you can hop onto YouTube on Zoom to ask your questions. So that's a good remember, especially if you like that content. Don't forget to like it and follow us. So the other thing is, I would like to see if I will talk to Bruce, because we're talking about swarm trapping and catching and all that stuff. Maybe Bruce might be willing to join me for a recording of the natural beekeeping podcast on the Hive Jive. And maybe we can talk about his techniques. I know there's that information on YouTube, but maybe if we put it up in a conversation and we chat about our various tips and tricks, that might be something that would be of interest. So Bruce, you have an invitation on the table and maybe we can talk offline about that. So the joys of beekeeping, the O of beekeeping, I'm curious to hear some of your feedback on what has been the best experiences you've had thanks to beekeeping. One of my favorite thing was to be able to go to Africa for several months as I was hired by the Congolese government to design and lead their nationwide beekeeping training program for the trade schools, and setting up a teaching apiary and teaching people how to use beekeeping as a source of income and food, so that they don't resort to burning the forests, for example. So that's, you could do that at a smaller scale, and you can do it remotely, because I also volunteered for Windrock and was able to, during the whole COVID thing, do that remotely through presentations and supporting them through their setting up an apiary with barrel hives, which Les, has built some of those several times. And I was lucky enough to have some experience with it, because we have a couple in that teaching apiary, right, Les?
Right, yeah. And yeah, what I love about beekeeping is meeting other beekeepers all over here in the United States and in other parts of the world, and seeing how people come at it with their own operating system, and they come up with some very unique ideas that I never would have thought of. And by talking to each other respectfully, like I remember one time talking to a Jamaican group, and here I am teaching beekeeping, but they're very competent beekeepers. Many of them have been beekeepers for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And so they're feeling a little bit like, why do we need this white man coming down here to teach us beekeeping? And I said, well, you don't, but maybe we can have a fruitful exchange. And then we had some talk back and forth, and we had a great time, and people were giving each other hugs at the end of it. And, and they obviously know more about Jamaican beekeeping than I do anyway, because I hadn't been keeping bees in Jamaica.
Yeah.
So it's just that mutual respect that you give for people, and then you learn from them, because everybody comes into, like when women came into beekeeping, that was very different. When I first started keeping bees, it was all men, almost all white men, retired white men. And that was beekeeping. And then women started getting into it. A woman named Sue Hubble wrote a book about beekeeping. I can't remember the name of it. But she inspired a lot of women to get started in beekeeping. Mm-hmm. And then more and more women took into it. Well, they brought a whole different perspective to beekeeping, because men tended to be very competitive and sort of like, I got more bees than you do, and I make more honey.
So it's a competition about the numbers, or how big the colonies are, or how much honey is being produced.
And the women were much more, well, yeah, but how do we keep them healthy?
Right.
That's a good question. We hadn't been asking. So, the more people that get involved, everybody's minds work differently. And if we communicate, we learn from each other. And we become better beekeepers that way and have more fun with it,
And we can use it for good, for community outreach. We started a program with Kimberly, the Forum of Peace for the Congolese refugee women in Houston, and set up bees and hives, taught them how to build the hives, teaching them how to keep the bees. And so I want to do more of that here in Austin. You can do that at your level. You can go and teach, at schools, and set up like school hives or community garden hives, and just kind of look at the program Hives for Heroes. There's all kinds of ways that you can use beekeeping to not only bring joy to your life, but bring joy to other people's life, right? Share it. It's a community building tool in a way, and it connects us all, to Les's point, right? We can all share that passion of working with bees and knowing that animal, and there's a certain reward in respecting and finding the awe in the animal itself, right?
Right, exactly. Yep.
So with all this, it is 8:31, and I'm really appreciative of Les tonight to stick around, because he was sick and he was having a hard time talking. And I really appreciate all your questions. Again, just come back next week. We'd love to share our thoughts on a specific theme and answer your questions live. or you can watch the replays on our YouTube channel at Be Mindful LLC. And we'll talk to you soon. And Bruce says we need to talk about that podcast. So let's do this. And in the meantime, you guys be mindful, and we'll see you next week. Thank you all. We appreciate you. Thank you. Thanks, Paula. Thanks, Steve. Bye.
Bye-bye.